I'm Fei Sha from Google Research. I'm one of the program chairs. Together with Yi-san, Carl, Animesh, and Violet, we are hosting this special session for ICLR 2025 Test of Time Award ceremony. Test of Time Award recognize work published 10 years ago that have a long-lasting impact to the field. This year, we have two talks. Each will be 30 minutes in the next hour. For the first talk is the winner of this year's Test Time Award, Adam, a method for stochastic optimization, authored by Diederik, Kingma, and Jimmy Ba. Diederik will be presenting, and with Jimmy presenting remotely. Please join me to welcome Diederik onto the stage.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for the great honor of the Test of Time Award. And thank you to the committee for giving us the award. I'm going to present with Jimmy, who's going to start. So I'm going to give it over to Jimmy.
Well, thanks everyone. Huge honor, definitely to be here to give the Test of Time talk. Like over the years, every time me and Diederik we met, we're always like blown away by just how many follow-ups work that's just sprung out of the Adam paper. So always been very flattered by all the spin-off, the amazing research that built on top of our work. And there's just way too many to give complete pictures in this talk. So instead, we're gonna actually take you through the secret origin story, the genesis of Adam. That's something many of you probably have never heard of before. So how did it all start? So about 10 years ago, I was a sweaty nerd in my grad school trying to train some nets. At that time, I was struggling with, implementing some of the attention mechanisms, and where the neural nets is going to extract some patches and look over just like a human gazes, and training that through policy gradient. By the way, a big shout out to this year's runner-up from Bannon, Cho, and Benjio. Without their work on neural attentions with machine translation, we'll all still be struggling like I was training those nets with policy gradients. And for any of you who have trained, nets with policy gradients before, you realize that, the variance is never in your favor. Between the different random seeds, you're gonna see the gaps that's wider than, the best and worst, bigger than the best and worst optimizer you can find on the shelf. And back then that was only SGD. So I was struggling, trying to get these work off the ground. And then at the same time, next in the slides, it was, I was getting an email from a course instructor, Ken Jackson, in CSC 2305. It was, I was already late for the course project. And if I don't submit the course project in 10 days, I would have gotten a 0 for the entire course. So it was really a moment where you're like, okay, I not only I need to get something to work, I need to get it to work fast. Fun fact here that for many of you who have, heard about hash and free optimizers from James Martin, that also one of the course project. So that was about 5 years before the whole Adam thing. And next. So, I was trying everything I could get my fingers on, going through literatures from AdaGrad, AIMSprov, hash and free optimizers, conjugate gradient, you can name it. So just like all grad students came before me, the true innovation comes from desperation. Okay, so meanwhile.
Yeah. So meanwhile, I was over in Amsterdam and trying to make VAEs work. And VAEs are a very tricky model to optimize, actually, because there are two networks that need to be optimized at the same time, which can be very challenging. And the scales of the gradients can be very different across the different networks. So some of the things that I tried first were the LBFGS optimizer, which is a great second order optimizer, but it does not work very well with stochastic gradients. And regular SGD, which is also great often for classification problems, but it doesn't really work well for VAEs. So some of the things that actually did work pretty well were RMS prop and AdaGrad, which are both kind of similar to Adam. One difference with RMS prop is that in RMS prop, the momentum is done on the rescaled gradient instead of the gradient itself, and it doesn't correct for the init bias. And AdaGrad is also similar, and it can be seen as a special case of Adam with an infinitesimal 1 minus beta 2 and a particular decreasing learning rate schedule.
Yeah, so around the same time, we had the idea of like Adam was just an evolution of these early works where we're adding the momentums, where the weights is being updated as the ratio between the first order estimation of the moving average for the gradients divided by the Rubin squares of the running average of the gradients themselves. So the motivation behind these updates is actually quite simple. So if you want to think about the intuition here is that you want to make different updates to different parameters. And how big of those updates should be dependent on how fast each of those parameters are actually moving in their own directions. So if a parameter is changing really rapidly, you probably want to decay the learning rate a little bit. If the parameters is moving very slowly, you want to crank up its own learning rate. So this allows us to essentially reason about if we can monitor how fast those parameters changing, which is through the RMS moving average, it allows us to reason about how far we can travel and in the parameter space, and we can do course corrections. So instead of doing accumulations of the gradients like the prior works, the moving average has become very obvious choice when you actually train in neural nets, when the number of updates for a particular problem back in the days was actually indeterminate before you actually try the first updates to solve those problems. And pass back to Dirk.
Right. So for me personally, one of the main motivations here, as Jimmy said, is that you want to normalize the updates in parameter space, which was not true for most other optimizers. And this allows you to reason about how far you travel in parameter space over the course of optimization. So you can just multiply the number of weight updates by the learning rate, and that's how far you can travel in parameter space at most. So the design of Adam really allows you to simply think about what the hyperparameters mean. Right, so one aspect of the paper, which I think is very nice, was the init bias correction. And the nice thing about this, so yeah, we use EMAs to estimate the first and second moment, and the exponential moving average is initialized with a 0. But because you divide by the square root of the estimate of the second moment, if this thing is biased towards 0, it means that you increase your learning rate initially way too much. So you need to correct for the bias in order to have an EMA that goes over some reasonable time scale. And the nice thing about what we found is that this is just a scalar that you can compute at every time step. And you can merge the scalar with the learning rate, which means that it's just a scalar operation. So it doesn't actually change it's something that's actually very cheap to compute. So for this reason, I think this is a very nice result in the paper. Also, what I found surprising is that I did not find this result in the earlier literature, whereas it is applicable to any EMA, which is a very common operator. Cool. So Jimmy and I, we met when we were both interns at DeepMind in 2014, and we decided to join forces on writing the paper. So here is a photo of us enjoying London as it should be through cardboard VR. Right. So the initial name that we came up with was AdaMom. AdaMom. However, a wise man, the name is Tom Scholl, he said to us, drop the arm, just Adam, it's cleaner. Okay, so this was a great suggestion, and I think it might have contributed to the popularity of the method. Thank you. So we continued collaborating over Google Hangouts, and we did a coin flip to determine the author ordering. And yeah, so Jimmy, this is where you wrote the paper?
Yeah, so this is a in one of those cabin in the woods, a place called Baker Creek in Lake Louise, Banff. So the original plan was to spend most and turned out the entire slope I was doing was the lost landscape of neural nets, and writing the papers, and pass back to Dirk.
Cool. Yeah. So my part of the paper was actually written in the coffee company on the Kinkerstraat in Amsterdam. So this is where the magic happened. So if you want to, if you want to write great papers, I suggest going to this particular place.
Yeah. So when you book a Christmas holiday with your family, I think we discovered that there's actually a hidden rule in ICLR 2015 back in the days. So I'm very happy that this rule no longer applies anymore, because that would have ruined millions of grad students' holidays. So the rule says back in the day, you first submit your paper on the CMT, and then you have 7 days to submit your archive submission on the archive website, and if they're were not available on December 19th. So just like all the best grad students ever in history, you realize the loophole here, which is if you update your archive paper before a certain cutoff date, you can just keep updating it until this cutoff date of December 26th. So while everyone else is on the ski resort enjoying their day, and me and Dirk just typing away every single day for the next 7 days to make the best possible versions of the Adam paper we could possibly imagine. And pass back.
Okay, yeah. So in December of 2014, we submitted our paper to ICLR, and we were actually pretty proud of it. We thought it was a great paper, very nice, a couple of very nice results. So several months later, we got the decision from ICLR. So what do you think? Were we accepted for a spotlight presentation? Were we accepted maybe even for like an oral presentation? What do you think? No, we were rejected from the conference. Yes, we were rejected. So they wrote, we are writing to inform you that your submission was not accepted for the conference track. However, we invite you to present this work as a poster to the workshop track. Okay, so what did we do? Did we actually do that? Of course not. We wrote a theory rebuttal. So Jimmy, you can explain.
Yeah. So the whole instance was, I think there's a cycle of, from infuriating to accepting the reality to take a couple shots of liquid courage and be like, screw this. We're gonna look over, what happened through this entire. Essentially, we did a long context processing of the entire review process, and we realized that the final decision on the reviews did not take into the account of the revision of the paper, which we did numerous times during the Christmas holidays, and so essentially the final revised version of the paper addressed all the major critiques, right? So and here's the rebuttal we wrote to the whole organizer, and the rest was and guess what happened?
So 2 weeks later, we got the decision, And we were accepted to the conference as a poster. Yes. Yes, so this might be very good news for everyone who has a poster at ICLR. It's really good to have a poster. It's fine. Right, so what was the impact of Adam? Which we'll briefly summarize. It has been cited over 200,000 times, which is not bad. This is a map made by Paperscape of all the papers on arXiv, where the different colors are the different clusters, the different fields on arXiv, and each point is a paper, and the size of the point is proportional to the number of citations that the paper has received on arXiv. So where's Adam? Let's take a look. Hey, okay, there's the computer science cluster in the bottom left. Let's zoom in. Oh, yes, and there it is. It is actually the biggest point in the computer science cluster. And then if you click on it, you can see the papers that cited it. And I was actually pretty surprised by this, that it's actually used far outside of computer science. It's even used in high energy theory for some reason. I have no idea how you would use Adam in high energy theory, but fine with me. So some follow-up works we're gonna discuss. Right, so one very famous one is Adam W. So this is a paper that showed how to do proper weight decay in combination with Adam, and it works really well. One other work is Adam Mini, which is presented at this conference. So this work showed that you can share the second moment estimates across the rows or the columns of a weight matrix. So this allows you to reduce the amount of memory that's used by Adam by a large factor, while not having any impacts on the loss and the training speed. But it does allow you to use a larger batch size, which increases the speed of training. So this is, I think, a great result that was also argued from theory, and there's some really nice follow-up works from the same authors as well. There's also some really interesting second-order optimizers that are gaining momentum that I think kind of started with KFAC. There's also the shampoo and the soap optimizers, which are based on similar ideas. I think soap is an evolution of shampoo where they still use Adam inside, luckily, yes. And there's the Muon optimizer, which is starting to gain traction since last year. But it still uses Adam for a subset of the parameters. So there's still reasons to cite us.
So one of the toughest questions we always get over the years is like, does it actually converge? So this is another line of follow-up works that we see. So I blame on never write a paper in a cabin in the wood, and also don't take too much liquid courage while you're writing the paper. So turned out there's 3 years after we submit our original Adam paper, there was the follow-up work on the convergence of Adam and beyond from the Reddy and al. So essentially show that in the worst case, the method would not converge. So there always exists for any pre-selected hyperparameter, beta 1 and beta 2, there's always going to be a problem that Adam would diverge, essentially. And then follow up 4 years after, in the year of 2022, the work done by De Freitas, Leon Batul, and I think Francis Bach was also on this work where they show that actually, in a version of Adam that you get rid of all the momentum, the method does converge. So the key insight there is that Adam is to AdaGrad is like constant step SGD is to decaying learning rate scheduled SGD. So that was pretty cool, but it's not very satisfying where they have to modify the method by itself. And towards the end of the same year, 2022, there's a work by John et al. Shows that actually if you do the things other way around, so instead of picking the hyperparameters and then pick the optimization problems, you can do instead you choose the optimization problem first, and then you pick hyperparameter, then there's a chance where the atom always converges. So this is like very similar to in practice what happened when you do graduate student descent on a machine learning problem is that your advisor gave you a data set or you download somewhere from Hugging Face and you run your first trial run and you look at the curve, you're not so happy with it, and then you tweak the learning rate, you tweak the momentums, you tweak the alpha and betas, you tweak the epsilons, and then maybe you're like 100th try, you get a curve that's presentable and the training run finally converges. So this is essentially the theoretical analysis of that regime. So essentially it says that there's essentially a phase transition in the ratio of beta 1 and beta 2, where illustrated at the bottom, if you are in the red region, so that is if your beta 2 is set too small, then most likely you're going to diverge, right? But there is a world where if you pre-pick if you know the optimization problems, you know the training data set, you know the neural network architecture, and then you set the beta 2 large enough, then there's always a region that's in the blue, shaded in blue, where the methods converge. And then there's the third line of follow-up work. So in the next slide, that often over the years, that always think about, like, can we do better, right? So the fundamental question is like, how fast can we go? And here's a very interesting work from John and all kind of noisy quadratic models that essentially highlight a very simple insight where turned out we're actually pretty close to the fastest we can go with the current optimizers. The thought experiment is very simple. Consider estimating a mean of a Gaussian, right? So the information theoretical lower bound or the asymptotic risk approaches 1 over n, n's number of samples you have to estimate the mean of this Gaussian, right? And then the optimizers, the key insight here is like the optimizers like Adam, which is like you have a preconditioner raised to the power of 1/2 plus learning rate schedule is actually really, really close to theoretical the lower bound on how fast we can drive the losses when, right, the condition is when the batch size is not too big and the problem is axis aligned. So in practice, in deep learning, we're actually very lucky because if you think about training those large language models, we have a data set that's as big as the whole internet. And our cluster is not nearly as big. So we had to actually, cut out losses and use, smaller mini batches. And then we also have, unlike all the other field, full control over the optimization problem itself. We have full control over the network architecture and loss functions, right? So maybe I think, the reason why Adam is not so popular in the high energy physics is because these are the problems where it's predefined but in deep learning, we control our own destiny, right? So we can actually change the architecture to make the problem very axis aligned. So that's kind of like tells us, well, maybe in the current practical regime, this is as fast as we can go when it comes to method. So what's next? So to the next slide. So what's next is I think is like right now in the last 3 or 4 years, we're seeing this essentially this perfect storm of the convergence between large normal compute and huge amount of data downloaded from the internet, plus huge influx of really, really smart people like you guys in the audience, create this perfect storm where speed running, what I call the intelligence maxing path. So in this speed running game, if you believe the method is kind of pretty close to the theoretical limit, then the only thing that really matters is the amount of supervision signal, right? So there's an old word say, garbage in, but garbage out for all the machine learning systems. I think when it comes to large scale AI systems we're building today with large language models, it's not different. Ultimately, we have a lot of compute. It's all just about how much supervision signal can we get. It's the only thing that matters over everything else. So we can start with, when it comes to supervision signal, there's the imitation learnings, the next token predictions, the pre-training paradigms, and these days we have the reinforcement learnings with reasonings, where you can get so much more out of one couple tokens. And then when you pair it with the pre-training with reasonings, right? Like most of humans get much smarter when you pair them with a laptop. Then the tool use and formal system that gives you the next click into intelligence. And after that click, right, after all the tool use, then we form a committee of humans, just like the Neurons conference, that will select our best papers and everyone over-index on the best paper next year. And we iterate and improve ourselves, right? And that formally close the loop with self-improvement, which is the next point here. So what's the conclusion on the path and intelligent maxing paths, right? So so essentially, if you have a very motivated team in the last 4 years, build out a super GPU cluster, then the success is the only possible outcome. Success guaranteed, essentially.
Yes, we just have a few minutes left. But yeah, so I think there's a lot of reasons for optimism. So AI could lead to a significant acceleration of progress in technology, and has the potential to improve almost all aspects of life, including better healthcare, for example. Relatedly, it can drive significant economic growth, which in principle everyone could benefit from that. But I also think there are some serious reasons for concern, and I think it's important that people also seriously think about that. So, for example, generative AI is becoming extremely powerful. So it's becoming harder, to distinguish real from fake. It also becomes easier to mass brainwash voters, which is very concerning, for democracy. And most of all, what will happen if humans are not anymore competitive with machines? What if people can't make money anymore in the future? It could happen. It could happen that that all the profits are going to the owners of the machines and going to the owners of capital. So this is, I think, a huge risk that we need to mitigate. So yeah, we need some very strong mitigations. I need to act on it. So we need to implement various countermeasures in our technology to counter the risks. We need to implement sensible AI regulations. I think it's very important to do that as well. And we also we need to make sure that that we're going to help everyone that's being negatively affected by AI, which might start to happen in the coming 10 years. There could be a lot of people that are going to be without a job, for example, and it's not going to be the case by default that it's going to be fine. I think we need to make sure that we're going to strengthen our social systems and to strengthen our social safety nets in our countries to make sure that everyone's boat is lifted. So that's the final message that I would like to give. And then over to questions.
So my co-authors and I, we are very honored to receive this award. And I'm very excited about the opportunity to give this retrospective talk. Retrospective talks are fun. The previous one set a high bar. I'll try to meet it. So today I'll tell you first the story of this paper. It's a rather unusual story. Then I will share with you how we would write this paper today if we had better understood the significance of what we invented. And then I'll share with you some speculations on where our field is and where it could be going. So this paper, Neural Machine Translation by Jointly Learning to Align and Translate, it is an outcome of the Neural Machine Translation project that took place at Université de Montréal in 2014 to 2015. And at that time, people did not really believe in the potential of deep learning for natural language processing. And Kyung-Hoon and Joshua started this ambitious project to broaden the use of deep learning, to challenge the status quo. And many people took part in this project, including before I arrived for my summer internship. And so these people are not on the paper, but I just want to acknowledge their contributions. Chalar, Bart, Jean, and Felix. This work was built on their code, and they participated in some discussions that sort of influenced our way of thinking. So, yes, this is an internship project. I arrived to Montreal in summer 2014, and this is what I find when I arrive, that you do machine translations with statistical machine translation systems. And how they work is that you compile a table of phrases in the source and the target language, and you estimate the frequency of each phrase pair. For example, here, the German word natürlich can be translated as of course or naturally, and you have a probability of each possible translation. And at the actual translation time, you're kind of trying to solve a puzzle. You're breaking the source sentence into phrases. You're trying to find the translation for the phrases which are likely, and that the ultimate sentence sequence of words that you make from these phrases is likely according to a statistical language model. But also at this time, there were these pioneering papers trying to add some neural spice. So Schwenk, Kalkbrenner, and Blonsam, and also Joshua and Cho, people were already trying to use neural networks as a part of these pipelines to predict the probability of a phrase pair or to re-rank translation candidates. And this is interesting, but you have the same statistical machine translation system as the backbone, and this has limitations. And then at this point, we started to cautiously experiment with end-to-end generation, where one neural network just generates the entire translation. And we're hearing rumors that Google is cooking something, and they have many layers and many GPUs. But we don't, and later we learn that what they were cooking is sequence-to-sequence learning paper that got a very well-deserved Test of Time award at the previous Europe's. But we don't know everything. We just hear rumors. We have a bit of that pressure, that desperation-like inspiration. So here is where our end-to-end generation is. That we have one layer encoder-decoder, GRU-RNN, and you can see this picture on the right. So it reads the source sentence, it makes a vector, and then it generates the target sentence based on this vector. And it doesn't work, basically. So the translation quality at the time was measured using BLEU score, and statistical machine translation has BLEU score of 30, and we have BLEU score of 17. And training takes 5 days on one Titan GPU. There is not so many of them in Joshua's lab. We can run about 4 experiments in parallel. We know that we are particularly struggling with long sentences. So in this plot on the right, you can see that as soon as the sentence length gets around 40, our BLEU score drops down dramatically. So yeah, we know that Google is scaling things up. We cannot. We need to do something different. Enough desperation for innovation. So what we came up with, we let the recurrent neural network search for the required information. Search was the term that we used. That was the inspiration. So we let the decoder RNN look for where exactly in a representation of the source sentence the useful information is. And on this slide, I will compare the original terms we used and the terms people use now when they talk about attention mechanism. So in our approach, we started, even before generating the translation, we started by pre-computing what we called annotations for the source sentence, by running a bidirectional RNN with the source sentence as the input. And annotations these days are called keys and values. Then at the translation time, the decoder RNN computed what we called alignment. And alignment is a term from machine translation. It means which words in the source sentence correspond to which words in the translated sentence. Now, this alignment is called attention weights, and you compute it using queries and keys. And then we used the alignment to compute what we called context from the annotations. And these days, this is called attention output, computing attention outputs using weights and values. So, and then we generated the next word, and then we updated the RNN, we computed the next RNN state. So people often ask me, why is your terminology so weird? And that's a great question. It's because, we know Google is cooking, and we really rushed the paper. But luckily, Joshua added this last moment change that which says, intuitively, this implements a mechanism of attention in the decoder. The decoder decides parts of the source sentence to pay attention to. And I guess this may have doubled our citation numbers or something like that. So what happened after was pretty epic. I launched an experiment on the 9th of August, on Friday, and I come back to the lab on Monday, and the loss curve does this. It just drops. So the network learns way better. And I make this commit that I found on GitHub. It says, search thing seems to work. It changes 3 files. It adds 67 lines of code, and it removes 18 lines of code. And I think you can probably implement Adam with less lines of code. And I guess this is why my award has this runner-up prefix. So it worked amazingly well. So you can see this new curve. The translation quality doesn't drop anymore for longer sentences. It stays flat for 40, 50, 60 words. And of course, we have a lot of papers these days that transformers and still do not generalize to arbitrary length. That was a big jump. And looking at the alignment, that was like an altogether mystic experience, because we saw how they correspond to how humans would explain their translation process. So when you translate from English to French, you can mostly do that in the left to right, word by word fashion. But sometimes the word order is reversed in these 2 languages. And we saw in the alignments that the forward word order most of the times and the reverse word order were appropriate. That was a miracle. Other times, the network would attend to unexpected random places. There was this really interesting mix of, aha, I get it, and, oh, well, that's deep learning, whatever. So we get credit for inventing the attention mechanism, and that's great, and it's fair. But if without our paper, you would still have it. Because at this same year, there were 2 other papers that essentially proposed the same idea. Memory networks by Weston et al. And neural Turing machines by Grace et al. So they have the key ingredients: variable length representations, selecting where to focus the attention, and reading from the attention focus. So I think often ideas, there is just the right moment for them, and they're just waiting for someone to invent them. And what happened after? The first wave of impact was a number of papers that were using the same attention-based approach to produce long outputs based on long inputs, using bidirectional RNNs to encode the input and using attention to connect the input and the output. And that was fun to watch. But of course, the biggest impact of attention mechanism of this paper is through transformers. And I will talk about transformers a little bit later. Now let me switch gears and move on to the second part of the talk. 10 years have passed, and it's clear now we undersold our paper. And let me try to sell it better today. So if I were to write this paper again, I would frame it as tackling the fundamental challenge of modeling dependencies in traces of human intelligence. And let me elaborate what I mean by this. Consider a neural network that learns to imitate token by token what humans do. For example, translating from French to English. To continue the sentence with the right word, the representation after the last word must depend on a lot of previous words. And what do I mean specifically by depend? On this slide, I've picked an example sentence pair in which changing the context of the French word gagner must change the contextualized representation of the word man. This is because gagner translates to win in English. When we talk about money, that you win in a lottery, and to earn when we talk about salaries. So I replace the phrase X à la loterie with the phrase Y, un salaire, and the vector representation of the word man must change as well. More generally, changes anywhere in the input can cause changes anywhere else in the representations. And the changes of the representations, they may be required arbitrary number of steps later. What kind of neural architecture can facilitate learning long-term dependencies? There was a long debate on that in academic discourse with contributions from Schmidt-Huber, Hochreiter, Joshua, but nearly all these papers, they were stuck in the RNN mindset. And RNN mindset has deficiencies. Again, using that sequence-to-sequence learning paper, the figure from the sequence-to-sequence learning paper, if to change h of y based on h of a in this figure, RNN must learn to change h of y based on h of x, based on h of end of sequence, based on h of c, and you got me. It must be hard to learn a transition function which can productively add content to the state and yet keep all the previous content for modeling arbitrary dependencies. And it's probably easier to just overfit all your training data and not learn anything at all. There was another way. The other way is to model dependencies explicitly as discrete latent variables and to marginalize the latent variables for training. And this other approach did inspire our work. So this latent variable often looks like something like a path in a two-dimensional maze, like in this picture on the right. And these approaches are great, but if you want the latent variables to be marginalizable, you have to impose a structure on the model that constrains the model. In this particular picture, the path through the maze has to go up and to the right. Up and to the right, it cannot go down. It's constrained. And this constraint is not necessarily how dependencies can look like in arbitrary data. On the other hand, if you do not impose constraints on the latent variable, marginalization is intractable and learning is hard. So I briefly considered that, but the internship was short and this was difficult to implement and there were all these concerns. So what we did instead, we basically solved long dependency modeling with this simple approach that we just let the neural network predict the dependencies. The attention weight, literally, is how much your representation at step I will change if you change your representation at step J. Problem solved. If you have enough data, if you have a very particular domain in which you have very little data and you know how dependencies look like in your domain, maybe attention shouldn't be your first choice. But overall, it does seem like a solution to a problem that occupied very intelligent brains for about 20 years before our paper. So if attention is so great, why constrain it to just the top layer of the decoder RNN? It's something that was in the back of our minds, but it wasn't really clear how to use attention everywhere. And of course, for that, credit goes to the Transformer paper, which has not just one, but I would say 4 great ideas, which made it possible to use attention everywhere. One is use it at all layers. Another is attend to the previous layer at all positions in parallel, as opposed to in our attention, it's recurrent. So, and because of that recurrency that we had, that you attend to the previous state at the same layer, it is a little bit more difficult to implement and definitely way less hardware friendly. So you cannot train at scale. And then the third idea is use many attention heads. And the fourth, and perhaps the greatest idea, is ditch the recurrent neural network. And I find it's a brilliant paper. My jaw dropped when I opened it. I said RNNs are done, and there was this brief period of time people did not agree with me, but eventually they were done. Well, now there is a resurgence with state space models, and I find it very interesting. Okay, so at this point in an award talk, one typically expresses their hopes for the future of the field, and let me give it a shot. So our paper belongs to the field of neural architecture design. Can one design a neural architecture that delivers better generalization than attention does? So let me formalize this problem. Roughly speaking, generalization of a neural network depends on 4 factors. You choose how you wire the neurons together, the architecture, and then you choose what you're training on. So there is the factor, the diversity of your training environments. And here I am including both supervised learning and reinforcement learning. Then there is model capacity that plays a role, and how much compute you allow at inference time. So let us fix all the factors other than the architecture. And let's ask ourselves a question. Can the network generalize better purely due to a different structure of the computation graph? We tried. There were many incremental attempts, but few efforts tried to achieve a step function breakthrough there. And my collaborators and I, we gave it a shot. We designed the edge transformer architecture in which the dependencies are not just scalars, they are vectors. And this was inspired by knowledge graphs and logical programming in Prolog. And we have triangular updates in the edge transformer, where we compute edge representations based on representations of all adjacent edges. So this is rather complicated and very computationally expensive. This is O of n cubed. And it kind of worked in some toy tasks. So we were able to get it into NeurIPS, but at least at the scale at which we could test it, it didn't work out. It didn't really work much better than the usual transformer. Okay, well, so let's go back to the question. Can you improve upon attention? So I'm skeptical that this can be done, because if you add more inductive bias to the model, think about it, think of some kind of program induction inspired by cognitive science. This is going to contradict the bitter lesson that Richard Sutton so eloquently articulated in his very famous essay. It will diminish the network's ability to learn from dirty data. And at scale, all data is dirty. On the other hand, it's hard to have less inductive bias than what attention brings to transformers, because it's just the ability to model dependencies. There is also a different way to look at this question. Do we really want another breakthrough? In 2014, we sought breakthroughs to enable helpful applications. Think better machine translation, better information retrieval and question answering. And I, in particular, craved AI that helps me make my plots for my papers. And since then, the progress has been unbelievable, almost too fast. And I think in 2025, some actors are motivated by different things. They desire a breakthrough to achieve global dominance, to get to unlimited power. And another thing that often I think motivates these actors is this insecurity that someone else equally powerful will arrive at superintelligence first. So there is this crazy arms race going on. And I personally find it comforting that the actors' progress in this arms race is hindered by training environment diversity, or simply put, data scarcity. To quote what Ilya said at NeurIPS, there is but one internet. And I see comfort in this especially because we have absolutely no way of controlling what ultra elite is doing there. Because the ship has sailed. If you quit, they will hire another 22-year-old, very good, who will help them push the frontier. So I'm painting a grim picture here, but maybe there is something we can still do. And before I go into a solution mode, there will be one more problem slide. So these days we have a lot of healthy conversations about AI risks. And very reasonable people, they focus on different risks. Some are most afraid of misinformation that can disrupt dialogues in our society, and others particularly are afraid of sophisticated cyber and bio attacks. And there is a legitimate concern that the progress in AI will be so fast that we'll lose the control over exceedingly autonomous AI that's just too intelligent for us. But I have my favorite concern, and this is disempowerment. It is the real risk that AI can decrease the economic value of humans and the humans' perceived self-worth. And it's not the right place for me to go very deep into this, but you will get what I mean if you just read these two books. One is Power and Progress by Daron Acemoglu, who recently got a Nobel Prize in Economics, and Simon Johnson. And the point they make in this book is that fair distribution of fruits of progress is not preordained. It takes leadership and courage. And in the past, one thing that helped is workers' relevance for productive process. For example, during Industrial Revolution, the laborers were essential to the process of production, and they could claim their fair share by organizing in unions. If people become irrelevant and redundant for productive processes, what power can they use to negotiate? Political power? Well, that one is flaky. And the other book is Player Piano. It's a 70-year-old fiction novel by Kurt Vonnegut. And I think it aged like fine wine. It's the perfect read for today. It paints a very compelling dystopian picture of a society where redundant majority leads languishes in their comfortable and hopelessly boring lives, whereas a thin minority of engineers and managers oversees automated economy. It's a great book with absolutely incredible plot twists, which I will not spoil for you today. Just read it. It's going to be fun. So there is one, the disempowerment, I think, is actually a risk that conceivably we could contribute to remediating. And here, I want to put something on the table here. If we have private and local and cheap AI system for everyone, private and local are the keywords here, perhaps this could help us remediate the risk of disempowerment. So for one, because this AI is private and local, it will keep humans in the loop, which means augmenting without replacing. And for two, if privacy becomes the default, the disempowerment will slow down because defaults are powerful. To buy your experience, the developer of Frontier AI will have to contact you and offer a price. And you will reflect on this price. You will be the owner of your experience. And these days, we value our body parts highly. You don't sell your liver cheap. You don't sell your kidney cheap. And maybe we're just starting to realize what should the market price be for selling your data that can soon make you redundant. So how do we contribute to enabling private and local AI? We need to include amortized local inference cost in the equation for optimizing the neural architecture. We need to co-design neural architecture and hardware that can be mass-produced cheaply at scale and consume reasonable amounts of energy. And I'm just waving my arms here because I'm not an expert on hardware and manufacturing. And I think few people are in this room. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe that should be the future of our field, where we can still make an impact. And I'm very late to start preaching this message of private and local AI, and I want to give shout out to all the prior work on small models, quantization, sparsity, compression, cheap attention. And I want to give shout out also to people who made software that allows you to run models locally on device right now, like Llama CPP, Llama, and so on. But there is no ETA for running close to frontier models locally. We're about 2 orders of magnitude in terms of both the model sizes and in terms of compute. So perhaps we're missing an idea. And for early ideation stages, academic research pursuits sometimes can make big impact. And maybe It is your summer internship that will discover the missing idea. That's all I have to say today. I'm going to thank my wonderful co-authors, Kyung-Hyun and Joshua. I'm going to thank all of you for your attention.